Hi, welcome to What's So Great About Shakespeare. I'm David Bishop, and this is What's So Great About Hamlet, Part 3. We have now arrived at Hamlet's first soliloquy, and it's only 30 lines. I'm going to go through it, and then I'll come back and think about it some more. Hamlet is left alone on stage after the whole court goes off to their party, and he is disgusted by this court, this marriage, this world, and he expresses it in his first soliloquy after he is left alone on stage. He says, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon 'gainst self-slaughter." Oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on't, fie! 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember, why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet within a month, let me not think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Why she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. O most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets! It is not, nor it cannot come to, good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. And then Horatio and the soldiers enter, and Horatio says, "Hail to your lordship." So, going back to the beginning, I have to mention that some editions, and this is one, will say, "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt." Not solid, but sullied. Well, this is the situation that we're in with, there's 2 official texts of Hamlet, both published by Shakespeare's company. And one is the quarto and one is the folio. Here's the quarto. It's like a small book about that. And the folio is the collection of all Shakespeare's plays that was put out by his company in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died. So we have the quarto published in 1604 and the folio published in 1623, and the versions of Hamlet in them are a little bit different. The quarto is sometimes called the second quarto because there's a first quarto, which was evidently a pirated version, reconstructed from memory by people who really made a mess of it. They were just trying to exploit, it seems, the popularity of Hamlet. And when Shakespeare's company, a year later or so, came out with their quarto in 1604, it said at the beginning, the true and perfect copy, meaning forget that pirated edition. So instead of calling it the second quarto all the time, let's just call it the quarto and the folio. These are the two official texts of Hamlet that we have. And in this case, the quarto does not say solid flesh. The folio says that. The folio says, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew. Hamlet wants his whole body, his self, to melt away, and he wants to die. Well, the quarto says, oh, that this too sallied flesh, S-A-L-L-I-E-D, would melt. Some people think that's right. They think it means assaulted flesh, this too assaulted flesh with all the slings and arrows of the world. Most people don't think that's right. But a lot of the people who tend toward the quarto think that sallied is a misprint for sullied. So sullied is what you will see in more editions that don't say solid, which is correct, if you ask me. Sullied, Hamlet would be saying, oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. I think not. I think that what Shakespeare is doing in the play is he's showing you in Hamlet's first appearance, the first scene Hamlet appears in, that Hamlet is angry at all this sin in the world, of his mother in particular, and this hasty marriage, forgetting about his father. He's angry at that from a position of him being pure and the rest of the world being sinful and corrupt. He says to his mother, I know not seems. I have that within which passes show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe. So I say Hamlet does not feel that he is sullied at this point. Some will say he's sullied because of his mother's sin. No. Hamlet starts from a position of feeling he is pure and the rest of the world is awful, and he just wants to die and disappear. That will change shortly, but it's got to have something to change from, and this is the pure Hamlet of the first soliloquy. But also, not only do I think that the older editors were right when they looked at the difference and they saw the folio said, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew. They thought, oh, what a great, image of melting, of solid to dew or vapor. That's what he's saying. I want to melt away, disappear. Well, I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's a reason for choosing the folio edition and saying whoever changed it to solid knew what they were doing. They made a correction there and they were right, which I agree with. But also there's something else that Hamlet means by these words. He means his flesh is too solid because he is young. He is young and therefore too far away from death. He wants to die, but he can't because he's too young to die. He's healthy. He's got a long time to wait to die. So what can he do to speed it up? He could kill himself. But the everlasting has fixed his canon, made his rule against self-slaughter. Well, he's made his rule against slaughter, period. But it was well known that to kill yourself was a sin that would get you sent to hell. And you'd end up perhaps in the corner of hell reserved for suicides in Dante's Inferno. So Hamlet is not about to kill himself, but we learn something important here, and that is that Hamlet is a serious, believing Christian who does not want to disobey God. He wants to please God. He wants to do what's right. He does not want to sin. He wants to remain pure, unlike his sinful mother and Claudius. So that's why I believe it should be solid flesh. Unfortunately, my favorite editor, Harold Jenkins, of the Arden edition that came out in 1982, which I still use, made this mistake. And he helped to give other people an excuse to make it too. But if you see sallied flesh or sullied flesh, I would say that's wrong. It should be solid flesh. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. And there we learn that Hamlet is a Christian. And then he goes on, oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fiant, ah fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. Yeah. Things rank. This is an expression of not just depression, but also anger at the state of the world. And you can see a characteristic of Hamlet here. It's odd, but more than in any other play, there are repetitions, Hamlet, near repetitions. For example, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to be all the uses of this world. He could have chosen one or two. But that's four. In most cases, what Hamlet does, he does it a lot, is two. He doubles. And here is an example. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. Rank and gross. They refer to the same thing, that is, Claudius and Gertrude and the whole terrible court. But he could have just said rank, or he could have just said gross. Maybe you can say they're different. Rank means things that smell bad. Gross means things that look bad. But they're more or less synonymous. And this I call a double. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. I just note this as a characteristic of Hamlet's style. I would call it repetition for emphasis. So I'll mention that in the future, but here's a good example of it. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead. Nay, not so much, not two. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr. Hyperion, the sun god, a satyr, half man, half goat. That is a sex symbol. Degenerate sex, you might say. So loving to my mother, this is his old father, was so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember, why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet within a month, let me not think on't, frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Niobe, a famous Greek woman whose children died and cried a lot. She, O God, a beast that wants discourse of reason, would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. So we have an idealizing of Hamlet's father. He's like Hyperion, the sun god, compared to this satyr who is Claudius. Well, Claudius has not shown himself as much of a satyr except to mention drinking, although we never see him drunk. but he does say he's going off to drink, and when he drinks his Rhenish down, he's going to fire off the cannon to celebrate, even though they're all supposed to be waiting for an invasion by Fortinbras. So Hamlet has heard with the rest of the court that this invasion is threatened, so therefore Claudius gives this excuse. Therefore he is married with somewhat unseemly haste his sister-in-law, Gertrude. Now everybody also knows that marrying your sister-in-law, though it could be termed incest if you stretch a point, is not literal incest. But people who are pushing toward the puritanical end of the spectrum will say, oh, that's incest. They'll say, oh, you can't marry that fast. You got to wait for so long, and maybe some of them say, oh, I will wait all my life and never marry again. But most people are not quite that puritanical. Hamlet, young Hamlet, is. He says of his mother's marriage to his father, why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. Well, when you have an appetite for food, say, you're hungry and you eat, it satisfies your appetite. It does not increase your appetite. But here, to feed increases your appetite. It's a poetic exaggeration. It's a poetic conceit. Again, Hamlet is, stretching things. When he says, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Here is Hamlet seeing his parents' marriage as totally sexless, completely without sex. He might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. This is a childish or early adolescent view of a marriage. It is excessively pure or puritanical. And this is what Shakespeare is telling us. And Hamlet goes on and says, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. Well, that's like visiting her face too roughly. It doesn't happen. I mean, he is idealizing this, and he's idealizing the appetite for her marriage, which was a pure appetite of pure love. And finally, he says, they married so soon, within a month, let me not think on it, frailty, thy name is woman. A little month. And so she outrages Hamlet with this wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. So he is emphasizing the incest of the excessively puritanical contingent. And he's also doing that when he says, frailty, thy name is woman. In Shakespeare, I say, from my experience in Shakespeare, when a man feels that a woman has betrayed him, or in this case his father maybe, then to go from that betrayal of one woman to say all women are faithless, this is the beginning of madness. That way lies madness in Shakespeare, to make that jump from one unfaithful woman to all women are unfaithful. Frailty, thy name is woman. So you're suspicious of this guy. The marriage is he would not let the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Appetite increased by what it fed on. Frailty, thy name is woman, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. Well, we just came off the first half of the scene where Claudius gave this whole explanation with elaborate, antitheses, poetic antitheses, wisest sorrow, and argued that you got to forget about, the dead, you got to move on. And he says that they got married so fast because there's a threat from Fortinbras and they've got to demonstrate that the country is united. This explanation satisfies the court, but it makes no impression on Hamlet whatsoever. Hamlet's explanation is frailty. It is post with dexterity to incestuous cheats. In other words, Hamlet explains this hasty marriage by lust. It is lust that is driving them to marry this fast, because they want to get into bed together. Fortinbras, invasion? Well, Shakespeare knows that the invasion is going to be headed off and is soon going to disappear. So we don't have to hold the characters to thinking about it all the time. But it is it is a little funny that it's totally dropped and unmentioned and unnoticed by Hamlet. Lust is the thing that Hamlet is worried about in his mother, because she's old. Old people don't have lust. We'll get that later in the play. So here he is lamenting this speed of the marriage due to lust. Frailty, thy name is woman. She's just demonstrating the lust of all women that they give into. And but break my heart, he ends, for I must hold my tongue. Hamlet has been required to stay here at Elsinore instead of going back to Wittenberg, just as Laertes was given permission to go back to Paris. But Claudius wants to keep an eye on Hamlet, and he tells him to stay here, and he says that he is the heir to the throne. You are nearest to our throne. Let the world take note, he says. So Hamlet is the designated heir, even though he can't quite be the designated heir because it's still officially an elective kingship. If it were a royal family that the crown went to the oldest son, Hamlet would have inherited. But no, Claudius popped in between the election and my hopes, Hamlet says. So Claudius was elected by the nobles, by the court, to be king. Maybe they felt Hamlet was too young. We don't know. But now Claudius has designated Hamlet the heir to the throne and required Hamlet to stay in Wittenberg, and Hamlet has to hold his tongue. He cannot start criticizing the king, except in little needling quips, like a little more than kin and less than kind. So Hamlet has just got to stay here in this unweeded garden for the rest of his life. So he thinks, well, it's likely that Claudius is going to die before Hamlet does. And Hamlet is in a position to inherit, to become king. So he doesn't want to, disturb the kingship. He doesn't want to mess up the kingdom. And this is a very important point in the play. Hamlet feels the weight of the duty of being the Prince of Denmark, next in line to the throne. And Claudius, in Shakespeare, is acting like a good king. Because in Shakespeare, the best, I'm again going by my experience of Shakespeare, the best way of governing a country, from Shakespeare's point of view, is inheritance. A royal family, inheritance by primogeniture. The firstborn son inherits, and then the secondborn, and then you go to the firstborn daughter, and so on. Shakespeare feels that election of the king leaves an opening because the the candidate who lost may claim it's all fake, you know, that that the votes were off and they were influenced or whatever, and he was really the best candidate. So then they'll go to war over it. You know, Shakespeare feels that a royal family with the firstborn son groomed to be king and recognized as the next king all along is a way to keep order and peace in the state. And keeping order and peace in the state is the job of the king and the job of the prince and designated heir. So Hamlet has a responsibility to keep things peaceful. He's not going to revolt against the king. At this stage, he just sees that he has to keep his mouth shut and live here the rest of his life amid this unweeded garden of sinful people. Okay, so then Horatio shows up with the two soldiers, Marcellus and Bernardo. He says, "Hail to your lordship." Hamlet says, "I'm glad to see you well." You know, he says this, somebody comes along, "Hail to you, I'm glad to see you well," not even paying much attention to them. And then he notices that the man who said this to him is Horatio, his friend. Why he hasn't seen his friend in all this time when Horatio has been staying in this vicinity, no one knows. But, you know, he has other things to do. He has to be part of the court and so forth. So he says, "Horatio, or I do forget myself." Forget myself. Odd phrase. "Horatio, or I do forget myself." "The same, my lord, and your poor servant ever. Sir, my good friend." "I'll change that name with you." "And what make you from Wittenberg, Horatio?" But then he interrupts himself because he hasn't greeted Marcellus and Bernardo. He says, "Marcellus, my good lord, I am very glad to see you." And then says to Bernardo, "Good even, sir." These lines don't have to be there. They could be cut out. But what they're doing is they're showing Hamlet's courtesy to people who are lower than him, in this case, more than courtesy, friendship to Horatio. This is a clue to why, as we learn later, the people love Hamlet. Hamlet is not a big, snobby, pompous person who won't speak to lowly soldiers. He says hello to them and glad to see you and so on. And even remembers Marcellus's name. So this is just a little indication of Hamlet's nature, good nature, that we take in. And then he turns to Horatio again, and he says, "But what in faith make you from Wittenberg?" Horatio says, "A truant disposition, good my lord." Hamlet says, "I would not hear your enemy say so. Nor shall you do my ear that violence to make it truster of your own report against yourself." This is, again, beginning to get into the usual Hamlet stuff of an ear being, a stand-in for telling a person something. You go in through the ear, and it does violence. It's a lie. So it's doing violence to my ear. "Nor shall you do my ear that violence to make it truster of your own report against yourself. I know you are no truant. But what is your affair in Elsinore?" And then he says, "We'll teach you to drink deep ere you depart." Now, I have an idea that when he says, but what is your affair in Elsinore? At that point, we hear a cannon go off. And that cannon indicates that the king is into his drinking. So it reminds Hamlet of drinking. And what is your affair in Elsinore? Boom! "We'll teach you to drink deep ere you depart." Hamlet doesn't like the reputation of Denmark for being drunken. But at the moment, it seems pretty well deserved. And Horatio says, "My lord, I came to see your father's funeral." And Hamlet says, I prithee, do not mock me, fellow student. I think it was to see my mother's wedding. Indeed, my lord, it followed hard upon. Hamlet says, thrift, Horatio. The funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables. This is another poetic thing. It's a joke. Hamlet is being sarcastic. I mean, they obviously didn't keep the meats cold for a month and then put them on the marriage table. But, nor did Gertrude's shoes wear out between the funeral and the marriage. But, anyway, these are all poetic things that are not true. They're exaggerations. But Hamlet is bitterly joking. The funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables. Would I had seen my dearest foe in heaven, or ever I had seen that day, Horatio, the day of the marriage. These things, it's horrible. Seen my dearest foe in heaven. Well, dearest foe, I mean, prime enemy, but it's, again, a little odd. So this must be Claudius. Would he would meet Claudius in heaven before he would see that day, before he had seen that day of his marriage to Gertrude. But there's heaven again. God is around us. God, heaven, and hell, they're all part of the reality of Hamlet's mind. And he says, would I had met my dearest foe in heaven, Horatio, and then he says, my father, methinks I see my father. Horatio says, where, my lord? Because he's just seen his ghost. In my mind's eye, Horatio. Again, the ear to the mind's eye. It's hard to connect the mind and the body. In my mind's eye, Horatio. So Horatio relaxes. Horatio says, I saw him once. He was a goodly king. Hamlet says, it was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. This is in line with Hamlet saying, no more like my father than I to Hercules. Claudius is no more like my father than I to Hercules. There seems to be a decline in manliness going on around here. His father was a man. I shall not look upon his like again. That kind of man, standing up with the sword, valiant Hamlet, killing his enemy in battle, he's not coming back. But this is part of evolution. After all, the killing in battle resulted in the treaty in land being held by law as opposed to force. The world is evolving toward peaceful civilization with nations that have recognized lawful borders. But his father was part of the old world. He was a man, he was strong, he was a warrior. He was sort of like Hercules, and Hamlet isn't. Hamlet has grown up in peace. He hasn't been out there fighting. Horatio says, my lord, I think I saw him yesternight. Hamlet says, saw? Who? My lord, the king, your father. The king, my father? Season your admiration. Admiration means wonder. Season your admiration for a while with an attent ear, till I may deliver upon the witness of these gentlemen this marvel to you. Hamlet, for God's love, let me hear. Horatio, 2 nights together had these gentlemen, Marcellus and Bernardo, on their watch in the dead waste and middle of the night, been thus encountered. A figure, like your father, armed at point exactly, cap a pie, head to foot, French phrase, appears before them, and with solemn march goes slow and stately by them. Thrice he walked by their oppressed and fear-surprised eyes within his truncheon's length. Truncheon, like a spear kind of. Whilst they distilled almost to jelly with the act of fear, stand dumb and speak not to him. This, to me, in dreadful secrecy impart they did. And I with them the third night kept the watch, whereas they had delivered, both in time, form of the thing, each word made true and good, the apparition comes. I knew your father. These hands are not more like. These hands are not more like. But where was this, says Hamlet? My lord, upon the platform where we watched. That's Marcellus says that. Hamlet, did you not speak to it? Horatio says, my lord, I did, but answer made it none. Yet once, methought, it lifted up its head and did address itself to motion, like as it would speak. But even then the morning cock crew loud, and at the sound it shrunk in haste away and vanished from our sight. Hamlet, 'tis very strange. Horatio, as I do live, my honored lord, 'tis true, and we did think it writ down in our duty to let you know of it. Hamlet, indeed, sirs, but this troubles me. Hold you the watch tonight? We do, my lord. Armed, say you? Armed, my lord. From top to toe? My lord, from head to foot. Then saw you not his face? Oh, yes, my lord, he wore his beaver up. Notice the way Hamlet questions, and when they say he was armed from top to toe, he makes the logical deduction that therefore they could not have seen his face. But you didn't see his face. It's like a cross-examination. Oh yes, my lord, he wore his beaver up, his faceplate up. What looked he, frowningly? A countenance more in sorrow than in anger. Pale or red? Nay, very pale. This is a joke. Everybody knows that ghosts do not have red complexions. They are very pale. So in the middle of this tense stuff, we get this investigation. Pale or red? Nay, very pale. The audience could laugh at this. It's the little relief, comic relief. And fixed his eyes upon you most constantly. I would I had been there. It would have much amazed you. Very like. Stayed it long? While one with moderate haste might tell 100. Marcellus and Bernardo come in and say, longer, longer. Horatio says, not when I saw it. Once again, very precise testimony. Pale or red, beaver up. The details are being tested. Hamlet, his beard was grizzled, no? Horatio, it was, as I have seen it in his life, a sable silvered. Sable being dark, dark beard silvered. Hamlet, I will watch tonight. Perchance 'twill walk again. Horatio, I warrant it will. Hamlet, if it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape. There's a Christian's background coming in. And bid me hold my peace. I pray you all, if you have hitherto concealed this sight, let it be tenable in your silence still. And whatsoever else shall hap tonight, give it an understanding, but no tongue, no tongue. I will requite your loves. I'll make it worth your while. So fare you well. Upon the platform, 'twixt 11 and 12, I'll visit you. Our duty to your honor. And they go out. Your loves as mine to you. Again, the admirable, loving, friendly Hamlet. Farewell. And Hamlet finishes up, my father's spirit in arms. All is not well. I doubt some foul play. Doubt means, in this case, suspect. He suspects Claudius, as we'll find out. Who else would you suspect? Would the night were come. Till then, sit still, my soul. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them, to men's eyes. Hamlet is saying he has a feeling that there's a foul deed here done by Claudius. But it's going to come out. So this is the moment when Hamlet finds out that his father's ghost has been walking, and he determines to go and see if he can see the ghost himself. But notice that he tells them all, don't tell anybody else about this. Keep it quiet. I'll make it worth your while. This could be interpreted as treason, not to tell the king that you've seen this ghost. But they don't. Hamlet tells them to be secret about it. And they are. They don't tell anybody else, apparently. The secret does not get out. So here we are with Hamlet ready to go to the battlements tonight and see the ghost. And that's the end of scene 2. Now we come to scene 3 with Laertes and Polonius and Ophelia, as Laertes takes his leave to go back to Paris, which we'll get into next time. Okay. See you then.